Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Audio Signals podcast, where we talk about storytelling, storytellers, and stories in general. So that include anything: music, cinema, photography, any sort of art, and of course, most of my guests are writers. But as I learn, many writers are not just writers; they have other lives, and and that's what makes it interesting sometimes what they write about. Now, I'm very excited about this episode because I'm reconnecting to Stephen Jay Schwartz, which, as you're watching the video, you can see is there. If you're not watching, you can hear in a couple of seconds, because I have to say we used to know each other, and we still know each other, obviously. But since the time of hanging out at a coffee shop in the South Bay of Los Angeles, writing, working, stepping outside with a cup of coffee and having a good old chat and getting to know each other. So we just reconnected a few years later. I'm not going to say how many because it's going to age us a little bit, but I'm super excited. Stephen, so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Marco. I'm very happy that you reached out to me too, and as I mentioned earlier, we both got the black T-shirt memo.
Yeah, we got that. We got that. Is that a writer or a storyteller thing?
I think it's a storyteller thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah. I also wanted to mention, there's something about Marco that he's played a very pivotal role for me when I had my first novel out. Because he's the only guy I knew that was Italian and that could read and speak Italian. And I had, my book Boulevard came out years ago, and I had got one international deal, and it was in Italy. So they did an Italian version of my book, but I had no idea if it was a true, translation, how good a translation it was. It could have been terrible, and so I had Marco read both the English version and the Italian version, and he said they did a good adaptation, a good translation of the book. So.
Yeah, and I remember my mom actually did read it too.
I remember that too,
yeah. You have that feedback as well.
Yeah.
And you don't know this, the listeners do know this, but my mom started writing not too long ago.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like in her 70s.
Wow.
Short stories for kids. I'm helping her with that. I'm having a great time because when you talk about fantasy, you really don't have parameters and boxes to stay in. So it's kind of fun, very creative. Yeah. And who knows, maybe she was inspired by being surrounded by other writers, real writers. You're a real writer. Come on, let's talk about that.
Okay.
So let's talk about that.
Okay.
A little bit about yourself, honestly. Your biography, it's really interesting. Like you said, I had the opportunity to talk about a lot of these things a while back. But who is Stephen J. Schwartz? You don't need to get philosophical, but that's the question.
Well, if you've got 35 years, I can tell you.
You can come back. I don't know, for 35 years.
I will come back. Cool. Yeah. Well, I say a storyteller since I was a kid. I wrote my first short story called Sammy the Dinosaur when I was, 8 years old or something. And, my mom sent it out to Reader's Digest, and it was rejected immediately upon submission. So deservedly so. And then I always wrote, as I grew up, and I also had a very strong interest in film and filmmaking, and music. So there are two things that I was focused on growing up was studying music and playing jazz saxophone, and also filmmaking. And I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so there's no real way that I could get a good film education in Albuquerque back in the day. I was making films using Super 8 cameras, silent, and had to record the audio separately and sync them up with the projector and the sound when I exhibited the stuff. And it was just a lot of kind of fun, crazy stuff that I did with my other buddies making films. But when it came time to go to college, I decided I would probably go into music since it was a better instruction in music. And I went to a jazz school in Texas, and I spent 1 year as a jazz studies major, with solo saxophone. And that's kind of where I learned that I really wanted to go into storytelling, because music didn't really tell enough of the story. It was just, musicians could hear the story that other musicians would tell, let's say in references to other musical tunes. Could be playing a jazz song. You could be playing references to different jazz songs, and other musicians in the crowd would laugh. Oh, I got that reference. It's like you can kind of communicate with the audience. But I wanted to really communicate with the audience, and I felt through writing and filmmaking, you could tell your story. You can bring an audience along with you through an entire journey that's like inside your head. So I left music school. I moved to California. I continued with my education. Ultimately, went to Cal State Northridge and studied film, and graduated from there, and began making short films in 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter. Back in the day before video, back when making a short 35 millimeter film would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, which I would get donated. Every single aspect I would get donated. The film was donated, the negative cutting was donated, the cast and crew donated their time, the cameras we got donated from Panavision. Just everyone donated, and then I would use whatever remainder cash I needed. I would cash advance my credit cards to get these films off the ground. There's a lot to tell, in my history. Ultimately, I ended up working for a film director named Wolfgang Peterson as a development executive. So I started off as assistant, then I became a story editor, and then his director of development. Wolfgang directed Das Boot, which is one of my top 10 films of all time. He directed Das Boot. He directed In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood, Air Force One with Harrison Ford, Outbreak, The Perfect Storm, Troy, The Never-Ending Story. He had a great career. He was considered one of the top thriller directors of the 90s, and that's really when I was working with him. And so I did that for a while, and then it was all consuming. It was 24/7, reading scripts and writing notes and working with writers to realize their screenplay in preparation for production. And so finally, at one point, after about 5 years, I left that so that I could write full time. And I got in the Writers Guild, and I wrote a couple of screenplays. And then I was kind of like stuck out there with a wife and a couple of kids, and without any writing assignments. And I ended up getting a day job, and just making the decision that I would not try to marry my passion with my business, because it was kind of killing the inspiration to write. Trying to sell your screenplay was kind of killing my inspiration as a storyteller for a lot of reasons. We can talk about those too. But so I got a day job outside of the industry as a salesperson, and then I decided I was going to start writing novels, and I wrote the first novel, Boulevard, and because I had written about 12 feature screenplays before Boulevard, my first novel didn't look like a first novel. It looked like a very polished, novel. Because I'd paid my dues and I'd learned what I needed to learn. I had the 3-act structure. I'd read thousands of thriller screenplays, and so I was really prepared to write the novel. So the first novel sold right away, and it became an LA Times bestseller within the first week it was out, which was really cool, and got me a 2-book deal. So I wrote Boulevard and then a sequel to it called Beat. But I really enjoyed writing the novel and communicating story through the novel, because finally the story I wanted to tell was available for people to participate in. When you write a screenplay, the only way you can do that is if your screenplay gets made into a movie, which is really rare. But a novel lands in someone's hands and they begin the journey immediately.
And maybe if you're lucky enough, it turns into a movie as well. But
that's
the other way around.
And that is a smart way to do it, because then you own a property, and that, like, I own Boulevard and Beat, and we've had many attempts to try to get that made into a TV series or a feature film, and options have been made, and the options have returned to me again. So someday, the thing is that I own the property. So someday, it could be 20 years from now, someone might come around and say, I want to turn this into a TV series, and then it's back up in the game.
Right. I want to make it like a preface here, which is we already knowing each other and me knowing your background. I already opted you for a sequel to this episode.
Yep.
Kind of like the movie, right? Because we can talk about many things that you just pointed out. I mean, we're talking about the connection with music, the connection with movies, and writing screenplay, which I'm probably going to go there today, like the difference between writing screenplay versus writing a book, because it's something that interests me quite a bit. But the bottom line is all storytelling. We're all made of our past. I mean, all the things, I like to look back and I say, I got several lives in terms of what I focus my expertise in and what I work on. But I think if you can keep it in the realm of the core of what you love, you kind of then become the consequence of all your experience. So my point is, all the things you're talking about are probably what made you the writer that you are today. And you comment on that, but also tell me and tell the audience about the genre that you write, because it's very specific. It's hard-boiled. Can I go there?
Yeah, sure.
Noir.
Yeah, hard-boiled. Yeah.
And how did you decide it to focus on that? Because I read the book, I read many comments from other writers in the genre, and some are like, wow, this is as good as hard-boiled as it gets. So maybe a definition of what that is, definition of noir genre, and how you got into that. A lot of questions here. You pick where you want to go.
I'll see where I can pick up on that. Hard-boiled. I've always been interested in just dark subject matter that's really biting and intense. Like if you're going to talk about movies, it would be Taxi Driver, or Seven, even Apocalypse Now. Films that are very intense and create an experience for the reader that pushes the envelope. So for whatever reason, I had some demons to expel, I guess. And when you write, you can do that on a page. You don't have to actually go out and be a serial killer. You can write the serial killer, right? So so that's what and plus also I had I'd read thousands of screenplays that tend to be thriller screenplays. So that kind of was embedded into my psyche, writing stories like that. As far as hard-boiled, they talk about noir. It's kind of a period of novel writing from the early, the 30s and 40s, I guess, of the time period, and also film of the 40s. I really didn't know that I was writing. I didn't know what I was writing when I started writing Boulevard. I didn't realize it was going to be a kind of a really tough, hard-boiled noir novel. I just wrote what I wanted to see, what I wanted to read, and I was pleasing myself. It was something that I wanted to do, and I wasn't thinking about the market. In fact, after I had written the book, sold the book, worked with my editor at the publishing house for a number of months before the book was about to be released, my editor said, "Okay, so now we have to make a decision. Is this going to go in the fiction section of the bookstore or the mystery thriller section of the bookstore?" And I said, "I don't know. What is it? Is it fiction?
You're asking me?
I don't. Yeah." And he said, "Well, well, the market is, the mystery thriller readers tend to be more loyal to their authors, and they'll read more from that author." And I said, "Well, let's go mystery thriller then," and which was actually exactly where it should have been. It could have been fiction too, but I probably would have maybe lost some readers because of that. As far as kind of where it came from, I had some dark events of my life. My father committed suicide when I was 20 years old. I've always been, in everything I've done, I've kind of like pushed up against that and explored that in my writing. My first film that I made when I was in college was called Meditations on a Suicide. And that was just a short film that really depicted a son and a father in two rooms. And it was basically silent and German expressionist in the way it was shot. And very intense and very dark and painful. It's just all pain. I kind of touch upon that a bit. I have an old time friend who's seen all my films and stuff. And when Boulevard came out, I asked him about what he thought about the book. And he said, "It looks like you're still searching for your father." I said, "Okay, I get that. I can see that. There's a character who has a relationship with his father and the protagonist." But but I don't really, I know exactly where it came from. I wanted to do a detective story that was very dark and intense, like Seven, and I wanted the character to have a fault that was not an alcoholic, not a drug addict, but something that was maybe misunderstood. And so, I gave him a sex addiction, and he's struggling with the sex addiction, and he goes to 12-step meetings, and he has a sponsor, and he's trying to be a better person. But when times get tough, and he feels anxious, he goes out and picks up a prostitute, or he goes to strip club, or he goes to a massage parlor, and then he's back down to day one again in his time, and he has to try to make that up again. And so I wanted to see the character that was struggling to be a better person, but considers himself to be a piece of shit, in a sense, in his own mind. But his actions are heroic, although he doesn't really recognize it. And then I think that's what the readers kind of tapped into, is that here's a guy who thinks he's a shit, but he's willing to sacrifice himself all along the line for others. So there's really something heroic about his nature, very complicated character.
It sounds like it. And like I said, in the comments and the reviews that you got, I think like you nailed it in a very unique way. And here's the thing. I've talked to other people that for some reason people love writing about mystery and detective stories.
Yeah.
I personally, it's overwhelming, the idea to plot a mystery to me. I'm more of if I write something, I'll just start with a general idea and then I see where it goes. So one of the questions may be if you're like a plotter or a pantser, we can go there with that. But I have noticed that there is a connection always in trying to create a story within the story, which you just talked about. So it's not just the character that is resolving a mystery, which is pretty standard to do it, but he's also having a conflict within, and that makes the character very interesting. And then you can twist it and turn it and make it even more complicated, which sounds like the things that you do. The reason why you think that is important?
To have the plot and then the internal plot,
the story and the story.
Well, it connects to the reader in a way that just plot can't. Plot, anyone can write a plot. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, you have to. It's a difficult thing to actually create a believable plot. It takes a lot of time. I do a lot of rewriting, a lot of outlines. I'm definitely a plotter and not a pantser.
Okay, that's writing, the answer right there.
Yeah. Writing by the seat of your pants is when you just sit down and write and say, let's see what happens, which I try to do, and it always gets me into trouble. I have to sit and I have to write an outline, and then I have to rewrite the outline and rewrite the outline and rewrite the outline, then start the book, doing the outline, then fuck up in the book and go back and rewrite the outline and then go back to the book. It's just, it's painful. But once you get the plot, I mean, if you don't have some kind of internal journey, then you're probably not going to connect to the reader, because every story, the more personal you make the story, the more universal the story is.
Which is almost a paradox.
Yeah.
Right?
It is.
I mean, if it's so personal and so unique, how is it going to apply to so many readers?
Well, because everyone, like if I write about addiction, the reader may not be a sex addict. The reader might be a sex addict. So immediately the reader is experiencing that connection. But the reader might be an alcoholic. The reader might have a drug addiction. The reader might be a workaholic. The reader might have eating disorders, whatever. So the process is similar. And if not, then the reader has a friend or a brother or a sister or a mother or father who has one of these addictions. It's just so ubiquitous that people have this, that whatever personal journey I create for this character, going through his process of therapy and 12-step meetings and falling off the wagon and all that stuff, it connects to people no matter what they're experiencing, and whether they experience it, whether their family members are experiencing it, they understand it. And that's what worked for Boulevard and Beat, because it's a series. And so that's what works for that character. It's very difficult to try to recreate that in the next, like the novel I'm writing now is completely different. It's not in the current contemporary crime fiction genre. It's dystopian, set in 2099 with a female protagonist. Everything, I made it as difficult as I possibly can for myself, just by mistake. It's so hard because I'm trying to create that internal journey for a 24-year-old female, in the future. And it's been more of a struggle. It's definitely been a struggle.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Is it easy to develop the same character? I mean, you see, I don't know. I can say Sherlock Holmes. I can say James Bond. I can say many people that are the protagonist of never-ending stories. But they are still the same character. They develop in a different way. Maybe they grow. And is it easier to use the same character, or
I think so,
to the
yes.
point that you're just squeezing too much out of it?
No, I think you can always, and that's why there's so many series. That's why, Michael Connelly has the Bosch series, and it goes on for, dozens of novels, and it will never end because it's his journey. He's tapping his own growth in his own life, and he can pull from his own experiences. I could write Hayden Glass, who's the protagonist for Boulevard and B, forever, and I can always tap into that, and I understand his journey. It's very similar to my own journey, so it's like I can tap into my own feelings, and I can write that character, and it will be believable. Every time you go into a new series, and it may not start off as a series, it just kind of starts off as a standalone, the next book, and like what I'm doing now, it's just a new everything. That is, I have to create that connection with the new protagonist and her world. And hopefully I will manage to do that by the end of the book, and it will lend itself to another, sequel, and then a series. And now you've kind of, let's say I've nailed that character, and I can always go back in and write that character's journey. Once you've got a character set up, that's a lot of the hard work, is just getting that character set up. And writing, I believe, is all about character. Story is all about character. It's like, what would the character do if thrown into this situation? And now that's what your story is what that character would do.
That sounds to me, it's like, even if you're a plotter or you're really, know where you're going all the time, but they say sometimes your character brings you somewhere that you follow, is because it's not that you just write on a white paper. It's just you think as if you were the character, and it can bring you mentally in a completely different direction, maybe like a twist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that, right?
Yeah, that's what's fun about the writing, definitely.
Right. How writing all the script and adapting and being in the movie industry, let's start making the connection there, has influenced the way, I mean, you say it was a big advantage in having that experience and being able to deliver right away with your first book. But is that a way that, like a style of writing that it's kind of scripty?
No,
how does it connect?
Different. Yeah, I mean, the way it connects is that you are able, writing screenplays forces you to write an entire story in a very short amount of time. I mean, you're going to be about 110 pages. So it's got to be stripped down tight. It's more like a poem, like a screenplay is like a poem, on film, because everything is visual. It's basically dialogue and tight descriptions of things, tight dialogue too, and just minimizing, because everything's going to be told through the camera lens. And it's something that's difficult for people as writers to accept, that they have to be so minimal, because it's a different genre. It's not writing. It's going to be film ultimately. So learning to write a screenplay teaches you how to self-edit, how to edit yourself, how to tighten your story. It teaches you how to enter a scene late and leave a scene early, so that you're not boring your reader. Wait.
Define that.
If you in a film generally, or in any story, basically, you don't want to start the very beginning of a scene. I mean, it's complicated to really describe, but
that's why I asked you to explain
yeah,
it.
yeah. Because you're telling too much. It's like a lot of what you write when you're first starting to write is just like preamble. It's like you're writing for yourself so that you understand where you're at and who the characters are, blah, 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 blah. And then you write it all the way out to the very end of it. Like it's like your first draft. This is what your first draft usually looks like. Then you go in and you say, that scene is very long. What's really the meat of that scene? What's the most important part of this long scene I've just written? Well, it's kind of from here, which eliminates the first part, to over here, which eliminates that last part. That's really what's going on in the scene. So I'm going to cut into this late and exit early so that I keep momentum, a certain amount of momentum and pacing in the overall storytelling. So writing a screenplay, you learn that. You have to learn that pretty quick, to be able to cut in. It's funny, I wrote a screenplay for a producer when I was in college, and I didn't know some of the terms, and so I had written a screenplay, and he wrote down "cut to the chase," in one of his comments, "cut to the chase," and I'm thinking, fuck, the chase scene is like 3 scenes away. Why does he want me to cut to the chase? It's like no one's going to understand how we suddenly got into the chase scene, and he had to say, no, it means get to the point.
Get to the point.
I get it. Get to the point.
It happened that there was a chase in the movie.
It happened to be, it was one of those scripts, So, you learn these things from writing screenplays, reading thousands of screenplays. So that definitely gave me a huge advantage. Also, the 3-act structure. A screenplay is going to be first act, second act, third act. You really learn to identify what happens in the first act. You learn how to identify, the second act, and then how to get to the third act with the climax. So I just took those things that I learned from screenplays and applied it to a novel. And I had novelist friends who said, how did you plot that? It's like, it was so difficult to make that plot. Well, it's kind of classic screenwriting modeling to be able to do that, just do it into a novel. But that, for a lot of authors, that's not a very exciting thing to write, because they want to take the journey, as you mentioned, and write by the seat of their pants. And where's my protagonist going to take me? And you can do that. I enjoy doing that. Like, where am I going? But then I always have to stop at some point, because I've written myself into a corner that I can't get out of, because I hadn't thought about it ahead of time. And then I have to go back and I have to throw out a lot of writing that was good, that was fun to do, just gone. No, never be seen again. And so I choose to save that special writing for when I have an outline. Because once I have an outline, I've outlined scene to scene. Now I have the freedom to pants out that chapter, but I have parameters. I know where I need to start, and I know where I need to end. But there's still room for the character to do his own thing.
Right. You kind of adding decoration on the structure that is already there.
Well, you can add a lot more depth. And if you've changed so much in that scene, you go back to your outline and say, you know what, I'm going to change a few things around here, because what I just wrote in this scene took me away from the outline a bit, but I like where it's going. So now I'm going to kind of play with the outline a little bit to see where it takes me. Right.
So what I'm trying to do here is to create an outline of many different things, kind of plotting, because I'm like, all right, I'm not going to ask any more about this, because we could talk about this in another episode and kind of dive diving into this. So I want to spend the last few minutes of this episode in connecting. Also, we connected with the movie industry, with the writing, the script, and your personal experience, the music. So I saw the beginning of a video that you have on the website where you have given lectures on. You show a picture of yourself when you're a kid, and
right.
I remember that says, tomorrow you bring an instrument and whatever is in the house. Yeah. And it happened to be a clarinet for you. So I said, I did my homework. And then from there, you start going into the rhythmic of music. You actually show notes, octave, and different metrics of music that then you apply to the writing. Tell me about that in a few words, and then we'll do an entire episode on that, because I find it fascinating.
Yeah, it's cool. I wish more people would see that, because I think people, when they see that lecture, it connects with both writers and musicians. But when you write a sentence, you've written something that is musical, whether you want it, whether you like it or not. You've written something that has rhythm. A sentence. It has a structure, it has a meter to it, and it has a kind of an ending of each sentence. So if you have a musical ear and you play music, you can recognize the beats in that sentence. And I've kind of recognized, and I wish I had some examples I can go through, but which I do in the lecture. But yeah. There are words that create natural triplets, and then words that create natural half notes and accents, and it's not going up and down harmonically on a musical range, but it's going rhythmically. And a number of writers like James Joyce and Jack Kerouac, and a lot of really, really great writers throughout history have had a musical background, and you can hear it in their sentences. And when you have a clunky sentence, when you've written a clunky sentence and you've written a number of clunky sentences, so now you have a clunky paragraph, you can look at that paragraph and say, well, it's musically clunky. So why don't I find words that have that have a rhythm and a sequence of words that are onomatopoeia or something. There's a lot of things you can do to create a rhythmic, musical, poetic sentence. And to me, that came kind of natural. I had to go back and analyze it to see what I was doing, but it came kind of natural. And I think it came from my musical upbringing. But if you don't have a musical upbringing, or if you pay attention to that in your writing, you can write rhythmically so that there's a crescendo, natural crescendo to your sentence, and then some staccato, pa 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 pa, and then you can end your paragraph with a whole note, in a sense. It gives you this wonderful feeling of having experienced some type of musicality along with the poetry of the words. So you can write a hard-boiled dark novel that can be musical and poetic at the same time.
And you can go heavy metal, or you can go classical, or jazz, or whatever you want.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. But you do that. Did you do that while you're writing at the beginning, or you take the time after you're done to make changes to that?
Actually, it's kind of a bit of both. Generally, before I even know what I'm writing, I'm thinking about it musically. I'm kind of like, as I sit down to write, I'm thinking. I'm not consciously thinking about music, but I'm trying to write a sentence that has a musical sound to it. So the words, oftentimes, it can be a very creative process, because the words I come up with aren't necessarily the words that you would put into that sentence. But I would think, that sounds good. It sounds nice. And I'll find a way to kind of reinterpret the sentence so that it works, so that I can use the melodic phrase. So I just kind of go into a little mode where I'm just kind of letting the music come through the writing. And then when I'm done with the whole book, after I've written the book, after I spend years, writing and rewriting the book, when I'm on my very last draft, I go through the whole thing again, and I try to find ways to make it kind of musical. I try to replace words, find new words, find different ways to make sentences that maybe I didn't realize were a little bit clunky. Sometimes you think you're doing a really good job, and then you come back to reading a passage after a couple of months, which I did just recently. And I had this one, I'd never changed this one big section of my new novel, because I thought it was going exactly where I wanted to go. I'd never changed it. And then I went back and reread it as I came to it in this draft. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of clunky stuff in there. So, so it was what I considered to be polished. But then I realized, okay, now I'm going to do the musical version of that polish, and make it really comfortable to read, so that it reads musically.
Yep. And we're not talking about poetry. We're not talking about rhythmics and rhymes and that kind of writing. But you're talking about having something that when you read it, it has a tone, and it has the smooth and that. And I love that, because sometimes I listen to a lot of audiobook. Like, as much as I like reading lately, if I want to consume books, it's going to be a lot of audio. So the reader, very important to me, the way that I get into the rhythmic. But I wonder sometimes, is this how the writer would read it? So then I go into somebody like Neil Gaiman, which he reads his own stuff, and I'm like, yeah, he's probably reading it the way that you're supposed to, the way he wrote it.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself in a conflict when you think about, okay, I'm going to write it this way, but what if the reader, it doesn't
get the
pronounce
rhythm,
it? What if it doesn't do that, or if you turn it into an audiobook?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
I don't really think of that. I think that it reads, if you've written it rhythmically, it's going to read that way. It's just, if someone has an accent, maybe when they read it, they may not have the same meter that you've written.
But it will work, right?
But it's designed to do that. And it's a subtle thing too. It's not like you're really dragging out the vowels of a word. It's just, if you've got a consonant followed by the vowel and then a consonant, it's going to go, tot, tot or whatever. It's going to have that. It's right there. You've got that kind of rhythm. And you've got that syncopation or whatever you've got in there. So I don't. And when I've heard other people read, when I read it, I catch it, of course, because it's in my head. Or, I've had audiobooks done by this wonderful professional actor and does audiobooks named Ray Porter, and he catches it all. He gets it. It's nice I love hearing someone else read it. The way I hear it in my head, it's just like it's kind of, when I finish.
Maybe it's a little bit different, but that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's different because the guy's a professional. I mean, I wanted to read my audiobooks. When I got an audio deal, I was all excited. I said I'd be reading it. And my agent said, no, they have people who do that. And I said, no, I want to do it. He said, well, you're going to have to audition for it. So I said, okay. So I went and I cut a tape of me reading from Boulevard, and I submitted it to the audiobook company. And the owner of the company wrote back, and said, dear Mr. Schwartz, you have a very lovely voice. However,
you do. It's very radio. It's very radio. You have a radio voice.
But it's not. I mean, the people that they got, the guy that does the reading is an actor, and he's fantastic. And once I heard him reading, I thought, oh, I get it. Yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. I was talking to a musician the other day, a jazz musician, and he told me something like, when you interpret a piece of music, you tell many different stories, because one is how you reinterpret that music. Let's say it's not your music. He was talking about Thelonious Monk and Ruby, that beautiful song, and how when he plays it, he adds stuff. But it's like, that's one story, but that's the story of how the listener in this case, is going to receive it and reinterpret it based on his mood, maybe based on what he's doing, maybe he's driving, maybe he's having a chilling night with a tea and on a couch, and even that, the story changed constantly. And I thought it was really, really fascinating, that, and I thought, well, maybe you apply that to when you listen or read a book as well, like what mindset you are.
I think when I read a book, and then I read the same book 2 or 3 years later, and then I read that same book 2 or 3 years after that, I'm almost like reading a different book each time, and it's because of where the book hasn't changed, but I've changed, and I get something completely different out of the book. It happens all the time. Yep. Kind of scares me.
I know, but that's that's life. So well, we could go talk about that as well. Listen, as I know, we're getting to 40 minutes, and I have a gazillion more questions, and I love to do this thing. So I hope you're gonna come back even now after we've done this conversation, and that you hopefully you enjoyed it. And it's funny because we were talking, and I'm picturing myself, outside of the coffee shop where we used to chat for a little bit when you were there with your kids and your wife, and good memories. And I feel like despite the 12 years or more, I feel like we just picked up where we left it. So
I love that.
I love that. And I hope that the audience got that as well. This connection that we already had, and enjoy the many different aspects of writing that we touched on. And I would say stay tuned and come back, because I think we should and we will address some of the things we talked about today in a more deep dive. So I really enjoyed it. I hope
did too,
did, Stephen.
I loved it.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, Stephen will share with me, and I will put it on the notes, all the way you can connect, the website, the link to the books, and whatever other things is done and mentioned here. So you can get in touch with him, and stay tuned. Subscribe to Audio Signal Podcast, where we talk about stories, storytellers, and storytelling. So
cool.
Catch you next time.
Thanks, Marco.
Thank you.
You bet.